Hi and welcome to DevOpsCon. I'm here with Simon Wardley. Hi Simon.
Hello.
How was the keynote? What did you talk about?
Oh, I talked about how the future of DevOps is the new legacy. Actually, I talked a lot about mapping and the use of mapping within business and why most of us have poor situational awareness.
That sounds very interesting.
I also use lots of kittens and various other jokes as well.
Even more interesting.
Thank you.
So let's go back a bit. You wrote in one of your previous blog posts that it usually takes 20 or 30 years for a practice to become a best practice.
Oh, yes.
So where are we now with DevOps?
That's sort of an average. In terms of how long it takes for a management practice to spend. So where are we with DevOps? We're probably, we're about a decade through, maybe slightly more. So just over halfway through that sort of 20-year point. So we've probably got another 10 years to go before it reaches the point of becoming, that's what my mum and dad used to do. We now do this new thing, which isn't called DevOps, despite the fact it will co-opt many of the practices of DevOps. The new tribe will call it something else and dismiss. It's like the young child grows up and says, you know, I'm not like you, Dad, in any way, shape or form. Oh, but son, you've inherited my genes. No, I haven't. I'm totally different. And DevOps did the same to ITIL, and the new practices will do the same to DevOps. So we're about halfway at the moment.
But you said in 10 years it will probably become
the new legacy, yes.
Yeah. But it is still, it has gone mainstream, right?
Yes,
it is no longer a movement that just the hottest companies adopt or something.
Oh no, you get large organizations now talking about how we're going to go to cloud and build a DevOps team, and by the time they get through that process of getting it all up and running and everything else, which will take about 5 to 7 years, they'll be just at the time to discover they've created the new legacy, because everybody will have moved on to serverless many, many years before, and the whole new practices emerging in that space will start to dominate.
And a change of practice is hardly something new.
No.
So how about DevOps? What is the real lesson that we can learn from DevOps itself? Perhaps something we are missing right now?
Well, DevOps itself, one of the most interesting things to me is not per se the techniques within DevOps, but why DevOps occurred. So if you look at an environment, a landscape, there are various climatic patterns, or in business we call them economic patterns, which impact that landscape. There's about 27 common economic patterns, of one of which is coevolution. So if you take something like compute, when it was a product, we developed emerging architectural practices based upon the idea of compute as a product. So compute as a product had what's known as high MTTR, so high mean time to recovery. So when our server went bang, it would take weeks to get a new one. So we built architectural practices designed around that premise. So things like scale up bigger machines, N+1, disaster recovery tests. Now as it evolved to become more of a utility and provide all these efficiency benefits, its characteristic changed. It became about low MTTR. So when your server went pop, it didn't take weeks, it took seconds to create a new one. So we didn't scale up anymore, we scaled out, distributed systems, we had design for failure, we had things like chaos engines, etc. And part of those practices all wrapped up in what we call DevOps. And DevOps also includes things like, fast iterative cycles, feedback loops, automation of things like release, focusing on user needs, which, to be honest, a lot of that stuff was in ITIL anyway, and we sort of inherited that and, of course, dismissed it. That's like the father we don't want to talk about, despite the fact we learnt from it. You had this growth of this architectural practice, a novel emerging, then over time it's becoming good practice, which we call it DevOps. It's heading towards best, and now we're getting the same impact at platform. So platform is shifting from product and sort of platform stacks like .NET or LAMP stack. We're shifting into a more utility environment, so serverless like Lambda. And we're starting to get a co-evolved practice. And of course it will inherit from DevOps, but like any new tribe, it will, tribe's got a tribe, it will dismiss. It'll turn DevOps into its straw man. Oh, you don't want to be like them, they're so slow and blah, despite the fact it will inherit most of the properties. And that's all perfectly normal. So my interest is the underlying patterns.
Speaking of that, there's this stereotype that obviously DevOps is a magic bullet, and people like John Willis and Damon Edwards have continuously said, no, it's not a magic bullet. Still, why should companies adopt DevOps? I mean, what's the most important benefit?
Well, John Willis used to work with me at Canonical, so I like everything John says, except for when we argue, which is occasionally happens. So why should people adopt? Personally, you want to create a time machine, go back about 5 years, and then adopt. Now you're in a position of, if you start to build those practices now, focused at the sort of infrastructure layer, you will find that there are a new set of practices which will include some of those DevOps practices, but also some others at the serverless layer. I would tend to say now you should be focusing on serverless and those new emerging practice. I wouldn't go straight into building, going all cloud and building a DevOps team now. That's I know it's tempting, but I would be holding back and looking at serverless and looking at the practices that emerge around that space.
So would you say that DevOps is part of the serverless wave, or is serverless redirecting somehow DevOps?
So the practices that will emerge around serverless will inevitably inherit much of the DevOps practices. But like any new tribe, it will dismiss its parents. It will be like, I have nothing to do with you, we're completely different. And I'm afraid that's just the way things go. There must be huge numbers of people within the ITIL community who get very frustrated with DevOps they look at it and go, but we do that. I'm sure that happens. It will happen in this new world. I mean, that new world doesn't even have a name yet, other than serverless, which is a dreadful name. Or no ops or DevOps or no DevOps or whatever anybody wants to come up with. Eventually it will create its own flag, its own meme, its own tribe, and that's just normal.
And what are the rules that influence the DevOps game right now?
What are the rules?
Because you mentioned serverless the combination.
Okay, so I mean, in terms of the climatic patterns, everything's evolving. So DevOps is shifting away from being good to being best practice for the use of basically compute infrastructure, low MTTR, and there's a bunch of other practices around that as well. That's perfectly normal. You've also got the co-evolution of practice higher up the stack. So you're going to get this new set of practice based around serverless. That's also all perfectly normal. The other characteristics that occur, they've all been happening. So, with the shift to cloud, we got an explosion of higher order systems, componentization effects. We got the usual nonsense about people running around saying it would reduce IT costs. Of course it doesn't. What happens is you end up doing more stuff because you're in competition with others. So that's Jevons paradox. You don't get a choice. That's the Red Queen effect because of that competition. I mean, there's a long standing sort of list, and it's occurred to computing as much as it occurred to penicillin, occurred to money. Just repeats. So
DevOps is basically a combination of many aspects, or
so DevOps is a combination of a different set of practices, often related to the shift from product to utility for compute infrastructure, often inheriting for things like ITIL, and of course denying that sort of existence. And it's about focusing on user needs, faster iterative cycles, feedback loops, measurements, automation, whether it's deployment or automation in terms of configuration management or even release. It's a set of practices around that.
And let's go back a bit to your friend John Willis, who said that DevOps is tool with it's a tool with the free legs.
It's the future and everything else. I like John a lot, and the thing is, the DNA of DevOps will pass on to the next generation, but they'll deny any existence of the past. Tribes have got to try it, I'm afraid, whether we like it or. And of course, we go burn him, heretic. That's no different with when we shifted from product to utility with compute. We had pre-existing practices. They were like, oh my gosh, this will never happen. Of course it does. It co-ops some of the practices. A new set of practices co-evolve. It, uses the old as the straw man. And despite the fact it inherits from it, it will deny that inheritance. I'm afraid as we can try and make this sort of the new crowd who build around serverless try to be, you're part of our tribe. But they won't want to be. They want to be part of their own tribe. So it doesn't, they'll inherit, but they'll deny it.
So if you were to compare DevOps to something from our daily lives, for example, not as tool, as John Willie said, but if you were to compare it to something, what would that something be? Like the relationship between a father and a son, or?
Well, that's an ongoing thing, isn't it? Every generation denies, rebels against its parents, despite the fact it inherits from them. So yes, it's DevOps is the once child who's now has grown up and is either the mother or the father of another child who is growing up, who, as they grow up, will turn to their mother and father and rebel. So we're getting towards middle-aged.
Oh, that's just wonderful.
There we are.
The perfect comparison, indeed.
DevOps, it's middle-age crisis,
Yeah.
midlife crisis. Well, we're not quite at the midlife crisis point yet. Give it another 10 years and we'll probably be there.
Well, good to know. Thank you very much for the interview and have a lovely conference.
No problem. Thank you very much.